Dad, stop. Really, please stop.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dad Bod, where I'm here to discuss how we balance online and digital devices through the perspective of this dad, this father. And today, I just wanted to dive into something that's kind of been lighting up school board conversation meetings, definitely part of a lot of parent group chats recently, and that is the cell phone ban conversation that is happening not just at schools but across the state and across many different countries. And ever since Jonathan Haidt's book dropped called The Anxious Generation, a lot of folks have been really starting to point fingers at phones and saying, you know what, that's the problem. We need to get rid of them. Those are the issues. But as a dad, what I've learned is that most things with kids, and even to be honest with like adults ourselves, they aren't just solved by simply kind of banning them or having some kind of like abstinence, right? Or this device abstinence. So instead of just asking, should phones kind of be allowed at school? Maybe another question is like, what are we really trying to protect and teach our kids when it comes to removing the devices? I think there are a lot of questions around, or a lot of intention around ensuring thoughtful learning spaces where kids can really focus, where educators don't have to kind of focus on other things outside of just that instructional opportunity and that connection with their kids. And we also want our kids to be able to really grow in the way that they connect and communicate with each other. Totally aboard with all of that, right? But there's a lot more to that conversation. It's not just removing the devices. How do we find the value in that experience? And it doesn't just come automatically because the devices are gone, right? But we know that there are some real issues, right? The stats are kind of bananas as we think about how much media and tech kids are actually using. So thanks to the folks at Common Sense, full transparency, I actually work at Common Sense. But our research team has done some great research and really giving us kind of some insight into what this all looks like by the numbers, right? And what we found, kids are checking their phones at least 51 times throughout the school day. They're spending 43 minutes on them while they're at school. This was before all the big policy shifts. The number jumps up when we just talk about kind of how much time are they actually spending. So for 5 to 8 year olds, they're already spending 2.5 hours a day using media and technology. For 9 to 12, it jumps up to 5.5 hours. And for 13 to 18, well over 8 to 8.5 hours a day. So where are they finding the time to use all this media and technology? They're multitasking, they're using multiple tools, they're doing a lot with media and technology, right? And that even extends into the evening, right? Are they getting enough sleep? But as we think about the amount of time and even the kinds of things they might be engaging with, I think it's also really kind of important to recognize that as much as it's a part of their lives in many ways, it's also hard to get away from it when the notifications and the structures are built to bring them back, right? They're getting hit with over 230 notifications a day. And, I don't even get that many Slack messages a day, I don't think, and I'm an adult. But at the top end, some of these kids are actually receiving as many as 4,500 messages a day, depending on the apps and the kinds of notifications that they have available to them. So it is no surprise that we are seeing over 40 states drafting laws on phone use, and 20 have already kind of passed them. But many are kind of figuring out, right, what direction are they going? Even here in California, where I'm from, we've got a phone-free school act that's already out there, and it means that all public schools need to adopt new cell phone policies by July 2026. And that policy doesn't necessarily mean ban phones, but it does have to have very specific ideas and policies around when are they appropriate, when are they not. And in some cases, it is going to be a bell-to-bell ban, and others, they're going to really outline kind of when it's appropriate and when it's not, and then how do they reinforce that. But the real talk, most schools already actually have been planning this and have been doing this for many years. So the heightened conversation, is really coming, in that kind of like vessel of stress and anxiety that we've been seeing around the impact around well-being and the mental health of our kids. And so really seeing this as an opportunity to kind of like heighten the conversation, and these phone bans became a thing. So as parents, we should really be asking again, what are we actually trying to change? And how involved are we in this conversation with our kids, or even with the institutions that we are a part of, our schools? Here's the thing. Banning phones might sound like a quick fix, but the research, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some studies say that it really helps with focus and with grades, and I think that's amazing. Others say it doesn't really move the needle much on mental health or well-being, right? Removing the devices doesn't really dive deep into kind of the experiences of the disconnection that are really tying our kids together, for better and for worse, unfortunately. So maybe the better question, or the dad question really, is going to be, why does my kid feel like they need their phone every second of the day? Why do they feel like they need it at school when really their main connection is just supposed to be them and I? Now, it is important to kind of understand, like, what is pulling them in? What are they afraid of missing, right? It's much more than the device. There's something about that experience that they're connected to. And, how can I help them feel more connected to than real life, real friends, real learning? Part of that is in the way that we provide those opportunities, but part of it is also really helping them to kind of recognize what are their values, and how does that value roll out in the way that they're using the technology versus what they hope to be doing in person with their friends. So in order to do this, we know that schools are trying kind of many different things. There's the pouch solution that kind of locks it up all day, but the kids still have it on hand so that, it's still their responsibility. There's the locker policy where they leave them in the lockers if they have access to the lockers. But during those breaks and passing periods, you can tell that kids are going to be coming in late because they're probably spending time trying to catch up while they're out there, right? There's a collection system, which does pressure again then on the educator, as well as you are now, in possession of 30, 40 phones that are $1,000 each. So where's the liability in that, and accountability? So those are some of the big concerns. There's the out of sight and silent, essentially. Just don't show it, but that then makes it really hard, because how do we get kids to kind of regulate, their own impulses? How do we even role model that for them? How do we get them to recognize how to not get drawn in by the notifications like we were talking about earlier? And then we've got other ways where, just good old ingenuity. Put it in a school box, put it in shoe cubbies and pouches. So there's different ways that they're trying to solve this in terms of actively having the devices kind of not take the attention of our kids. And I think that's really important. How do we find that opportunity? But I think really the strongest thing to kind of really consider about is, we need our kids to be able to develop the agency and the kind of recognition around when it's appropriate and when it's not. That means reinforcing, training, getting them to recognize, when it's important, why it's important to them, how do they resolve that, and then also when do they not need it, and when is that okay, and what is in place to help meet that need of what they're trying to do. If it's connection they're looking for, how are you fostering that in the classroom? If it's access to certain types of content or resources or technology, get a sense of how that's present or available to them in the classroom. There's going to be very specific needs for very specific kids to why they might need a personal device. You might have to look at those things kid by kid. But as a parent, for me, my kids don't need to be connected when they're at school. I know how to get a hold of them if I need to, and I can do that through the office. And if there ever is an emergency, then I either go through the office themselves. If there's an unfortunate issue where there's an emergency on campus and there's that feeling of needing to get connected with us, I think the one thing is I want them to make sure they're paying attention to what's happening so that they can really go and be where it's safest. I'd like to make sure that there's some kind of two-way communication so I know what's happening at the school. That's my biggest fear, really, is how do I connect with what's happening at the school if there is an issue. But I don't want to clog the roadways so that, the people that need to be there can't get there. And I also don't want to clog the airways. I want to make sure that those emergency calls that need to happen with all the information and all that coordination can get through. But, I think the main thing for me is I just need to ensure that I'm not part of the problem. I think that's one thing that I hear is that a lot of these text messages are coming from families going back and forth with their kids, and everyone's got a different situation. So if there's a situation where you need to connect with your kid to pick up or whatever that might be, I get it. So we need to figure out how to solve that and resolve that. But for the most part, there are ways of being able to do that straight, at least in my school, straight through the main office. So the reality is there's just not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? But there is kind of a mindset shift that we should be kind of considering. I think one of them is just understand the why, right? So if we are going to be navigating these kinds of bans or policies, I think it is incumbent on us as a parent and, especially as, I work with educators, asking our kids, why do you need to have your phone at school? And, it's about, not just kind of dumping in on them and say, well, back in my day, even though, I remember when phones had, cords or dial tones or whatever. For me, it was I had a pager, right? But, that doesn't really connect with them when we just say, well, back in my day, right? Get a sense of like, what is it about being connected that they feel like they need to have it all the time. And it's a better way to be able to get down to really kind of like the core of why they feel connected. And then how do you start to build a thoughtful disconnect without kind of putting them down, right? I think another part is like, how do you then kind of flip that and ask yourself why have their phone at school? For some parents, they might feel like I need to feel connected to them, and how do you kind of work through that, right? So there it is, both a two-way street, especially if you do feel like you need to connect with them all the time. Another thing to consider is just really teaching good stuff early and often, like really talking about things like media literacy, digital literacy, mental wellness. These aren't just kind of like in case topics. These should be topics we talk about every day. The reality is, there's this pressure, this impulse, like the way that they're navigating media and tech. And I think if we're only addressing them when it's a negative thing or when you've got a problem with it, it's hard to get, again, to the core purpose, reason, or connection, why they feel so tied to their device. So, really addressing like, what are the good things they love about it? How are they finding those connections? How do they translate down into the physical world? Like having those kinds of conversations daily are a really good way of ensuring that whenever something does become hard or sketchy or just trying to navigate, they can still come to you. And then I think, as a parent, I've also been an educator, and I think one of the things we see is, as a parent, you're like really involved when they're younger, and then you start to kind of like tail off. But it's important that we're a part of this discussion, especially because we are part of the school community. So how do we team up with our own school leaders or even our own educators to have these discussions, right? We're not just parents, we're like stakeholders in the way that our kids kind of thrive and learn. So it's really, about us understanding more about the policy, more about the action, taking really these types of questions so that we can partner with the schools and really better understand why they're doing it and how they're doing it, and not just kind of like reacting to something we're not too sure about. And then schools should make space for this kind of feedback, right? Most of us want to help. We just need to know how, and we need to know the door is open, that they're willing to listen. So kind of in conclusion, is banning phones the answer? Maybe sometimes, but really it's about building learning spaces where kids can focus, feel safe, and grow, not just academically, but emotionally and socially too. That's incredibly important for me to see that with my own kids. And that has to happen both at school and at home. So it can't just, again, be a one-way thing, because the reality is they may not have access to their phone when they're at school. And then when they get home, if it's just all okay, fit it all in, and then it's like, oh, I better do this now because I'm not going to be able to do it when I get to school tomorrow. You're looking at extending their evenings or not even sleeping to really having unhealthy mornings where they're just jumping right into devices and not taking time to really kind of process through their evening and preparing for the day. So it has to be something that is done both at school and at home as a parent. Well, thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. This made any of you kind of like think a little bit or give you a sense of, oh man, this is really clicking for me, or I've got something I want to comment on or share. Please feel free to do so. Like or share, get it out there. I'm always looking for new tricks that don't involve yelling into the void of teenagers. So if you've got any useful ideas or experiences that you've done as a parent, please send them my way. Otherwise, thanks again.
Are you really still doing this?
Mom!